Eventually, they're going to come for our books. This is more important than ever before. This is the hill to die on. And I need to preface this with something, a lot of things, technically. People don't understand any of this, mind you. And I'm tired of saying it. There's a thing known as the Davos panel, which is the public forum. They provide a public transcript every single year of what they're going to do and how they're going to marginalize you and I and how they're going to subjugate you and I. The private version is the Bilderberg Group. You've probably heard of that. The Davos panel, again, it's very important. They provide us with a public transcript. People don't pay attention, which is why things get worse and worse and worse and worse and worse. Many decades ago, over 3 decades. I said 30, pardon me. It's late and I'm tired of saying this shit. That's my excuse. Over 3 decades ago, the Davos panel outlined why they were going to give you and I numerous forms of communication. This is why AOL discs were free. This is why when you sign up for a plan, for your surveillance device, you get a free surveillance device. And what's another one that I rattle off? That's why social media, which is social engineering platforms, are free. Flash forward, these are the same people who wrote emojis, JPEGs, pronouns, and GIFs is how I usually have to say it if I'm talking to Google, GIFs, into the algorithm to dumb people down and marginalize you and I. These are divisive tactics, but most people are marching in lockstep with their horse blinders on. They couldn't recognize a red flag if it was spoon-fed to them on the DARPA internet. And that's meant to insult you because most people are living in a daydream. But they're repeating that they're woke. They claim that they got their finger on the pulse and they're so smart. But really, they're catering to all of these things. An example is cancel culture, which is quite literally fascism culture. It's censorship culture. It's the opposite of being free culture. It's the opposite of freedom of speech culture. And that should have dawned on people, but most people don't understand these things. Another one that's currently another agenda, another aspect of this greater agenda that's fucking you and I up. Bear with me, I'm multitasking. 1 second. I'm acquiring some lesser magic. What was the other one that I was going to rattle off? So, verification process, the blue check mark, a lot of people have it. Chances are you might have it. You might have bought into that. It's normalizing the incremental steps towards social credit slavery, and most people don't understand that because most people assume that they're not debt slaves. Currently, you and I are debt slaves, and we're working towards being converted into social credit slaves. There's nothing but proof, and I've outlined a number of these examples. A handful of them date back to 2023. These are not the oldest examples, mind you. FedNow and WorldCoin, you could look it up, but most of you probably don't care because you're not invested, you're not involved, which is why these agendas are alive and well. It's why these agendas have legs. If you're running around telling people that you're an influencer who's creating content, these are other examples that are normalizing the incremental steps towards social credit slavery. These sensible people wouldn't do this. Smart people wouldn't do this. But you and I are not surrounded by smart people, which is why things are bad. I say it a lot. The 99% support the 1%. And that should have dawned on people, but it hasn't. By and large, some people will say there's more of us than them. But they don't understand. They haven't come anywhere close to it. Because most of the things that they do, most of the things they get up to are quite literally what these people want you to do. How they want you to conduct yourself. Flagging people, blocking people, blah, 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 blah. And keep in mind, I've done it too. Not very often, but I have done it. These are also divisive tactics to train you and I. It should terrify you. If you think of social media, you and I are being groomed, and how many people have, waxed poetic about, grooming. We're quite literally being trained. Some of you might say programming or programmed, but technically that's a word that's also been hijacked, for lack of better words, and weaponized. What I'm driving at with that is most people haven't figured this out. Simulation theory, the multiverse of adult fairy tales, and all things holographic nonsense, including atomism and quantum theory, are all in place to pave the way for a one-world religion. This would have dawned on people, and people wouldn't, talk about being NPCs and other garbage like that because it reaffirms the propaganda. It is propaganda. It reaffirms the narrative, in other words. Sorry, I'm still multitasking. So where some of this is going, as I began this with Eventually they're going to come for our books. It's down the line. But eventually that will happen. And the other aspects of this will be people like myself. I won't be allowed to access and utilize the services of YouTube and other things like that at all. Because thinking people aren't allowed. And eventually it will be illegal. Like, thinking will be illegal, for lack of better words. You can't color outside the lines. You do this, you do that. You'll be demonetized. You'll get a monetary sanction and or jail time. Or, and even further down the line, if I'm not mistaken, I mean, there's going to be public, it's going to get violent and bloody and horrible, if I'm not mistaken. This bleeds into so many other things, too. ICE, right now, it would not exist if you and I were surrounded by smart people. And eventually, whether they rebrand that or not, they're going to come for other people. Not just, people south of the border. And it's not okay that they're doing that, mind you. But does ICE still exist? Fuck yeah. And it shouldn't. I live in Portland, Oregon, where a bunch of kids put on frog costumes and danced in the streets. They did nothing. Nothing. So some of you might say, what are you doing? I've been trying to get through to people because they don't understand how they're contributing to all this shit, which is why it exists in the first place. That's one of the many things I've been doing. And that should, mean something to you, but it likely doesn't unless you think about it. So this kid's gonna rattle off something having to do with physical media and video games, because this really shakes people up. They're not gonna have their video games. These video games are gonna stop working. That's not how things should be, especially if you shell out your hard-earned money. But that's exactly what's happening right now. These are all red flags. This is a superficial example. This is, for the most part, trivial shit, and yet, if you see the forest for the trees and you have a little bit of foresight, in other words, you're kind of decent at playing chess, you can see where this is going. Not to mention, there's a thing called the Davos panel. Do you remember me mentioning that? They tell us what they're going to do. They tell us how they're going to marginalize our lives and subjugate the masses. And you and I kick back and digest their propaganda and their entertainment, which is typically one and the same, but most people don't have eyes to see. Here's the video. What the fuck do I know?
Collectors were trying to warn you about. Anthem just went fully offline. That means even if you own a physical copy of that game, it won't work anymore. And to be fair, Anthem wasn't a legendary release, but some people still paid full price for that game on release day and bought a hard copy. And that hard copy still will not work anymore. When I say physical game, I mean actual game data that lives on a disc or cartridge. Most physical releases nowadays don't do that anymore. You are renting access to data that lives on a server inside of a marketplace that you have no control over. And that's why game key cards on the Nintendo Switch 2 are such an issue. Not because they're new. Microsoft has been quietly releasing games that aren't truly physical for years, and nobody really batted an eye. The issue is that they're slowly training you to accept the fact that you will eventually lose access to the things you think you own. Because unfortunately, these companies know that once you're locked into a closed ecosystem, there's no resale pressure, there's no supply and demand. There is definitely no preservation. There is only terms of service. And it is wild to me that in a community full of supposedly tech-literate people, that no one would ever stop and apply the phrase, "You will own nothing and you will be happy," to their own hobbies. This is what...
So in terms of social media, how would that factor into social credit slavery? You and I profiling ourselves for one, right? We're doing that for free for somebody else so that they have access to our lives. In terms of what he said having to do with terms of service, what are we doing? We're consenting to these third-party systems which stand outside the jurisdiction of the Constitution and freedom of speech, mind you, which is why community guidelines exist and freedom of speech doesn't. Because those two things are diametrically opposed. One is fascism at its finest, for lack of better words, or totalitarianism, which I never say well, but fascism stands under that banner, and either way, it's garbage that is the opposite of being anywhere close to free. And this hasn't dawned on most people. So in terms of profiling yourself on free social engineering platforms, social media, you and I are quite literally being trained to take part in a society based on social credit slavery. If you think about it. This is why the verification process has been, like I said, spoon-fed to superficial internet babies, and they bought into it. If you pay attention, you see more and more blue check marks, which means people such as myself are not created equal on the DARPA internet anymore. This is also why what people call reach, which should not exist either. When you leave something online, it should be shown to other people because it was supposed to be an information superhighway, which is what we were sold. We were told, sold, and urged to repeat. It's anything but, and it was never going to be that. But to rope you in and get our butts in the seat, get us scrolling mindlessly. That's what we were told. And I understand. Keep in mind, I'm older. I remember the days when the internet didn't exist, and I miss them. I understand that scrolling wasn't always a thing, in case you were born yesterday and you just had some assumptions. Because superficial internet babies have no attention span, and usually they're not utilizing their frontal lobe. But they like to, whatever, dawns on them pops out of their mouth. It's terrifying. It's terrifying. Things are worse than ever before, and most people assume that, they're living in this age of information, when in fact, this is the age of disinformation and patently fascist censorship. In the last 2 months, I've had 4 YouTube accounts deleted. And this probably hasn't happened to any of you. This probably won't happen to you, because most people are doing the wrong thing. I'm still trying to work it out. Somebody, he's cool. He told me that he's still able to write me on my TikTok account. So supposedly my TikTok, he can see it, so it must still be alive and well. And I got to figure out my email address for that. I thought they deleted it. So for some reason, TikTok logged me out, which, sometimes that shit happens. But either way, I got logged out, and I thought they deleted it, because that's usually what happens. Either way. I'm trying to help you guys, but as always, what the fuck do I know? I'm censored on the DARPA internet, again, because, a bunch of people are, verified, which only made that worse. Those people are supporting a digital class system, the opposite of freedom of speech, just to be clear.